Welcome back to Second Breakfast, and we have a very special episode for you today. This is part 3 of our 3-part interview series. We are talking about Cam's latest book. Lemon Tarts in Space is a light sci-fi dark comedy. It is a tale of 2 ship captains out in space who encounter all kinds of shenanigans. Cam wrote, recorded, and produced this entire audiobook slash novel. And in our part 1 of our interview series, we talked about Cam's writing process. In part 2, we talked with Cam and Tristan about their recording process because they both co-star in this audio drama. And then in this part 3, we're going to talk about the editing and post-production part. If y'all don't know, Cam is the kind of person who does everything. He is a big Renaissance man, wears lots of hats. And so we're going to talk about the big audio editing post-production portion of this today. I'm really excited to get into this with you, Cam.
Yeah, this is the most mercurial part of the process, and I think it's sort of the purgatory that shaves years off my life. But it also is the most essential.
Yeah.
This is production value. This is tightening the shoelaces. This is, I think, what gives it that pow and pizzazz that really speaks to people.
Well, let's start with that, because I know you've done a lot of audio projects in the past, and I've seen you work on them and seen you do all the editing and audio production. But this project in particular seems to be really challenging, just in that you worked really, really hard on it in a way I haven't seen you work on the audio of other projects you've done in the past. So what was different about Lemon Tarts?
I think most of the editing process is fighting to realize whatever that initial vision was and trying to manifest it. You're doing some of that when you're writing, you're doing more of that when you're recording, and then you do this whole other landscape of work in the editing process. And I think I used to kind of take the recording as a document, almost a historical document, because you would have certain issues with every time you record. If it was the early audio dramas where we were using shitty mics in untreated rooms with echo and ambiance and AC cranking in the background, all these like amateur mistakes that I think if the project is good enough, if the story is interesting, if the voices are funny, I think the audience will forgive all of that. So I used to just sort of trust in the audience there. But now, because I know more and I trust myself as much as I'm trusting the audience, I can kind of chase that dragon and try to pursue that initial vision a little harder. So most of the editing process for an audio drama is chopping through hundreds of takes.
Yeah.
And this is weird because, again, we recorded all of Tristan's lines in one day, in one marathon 8-hour session. And then I spent a couple weeks doing my lines. He's playing Duncan Arugula. I'm playing Frank. And mine was a little tougher. It was a harder voice to record, so it was only a couple hours a day. And I was also working alone. With a comedy, the reason we traveled to go see him to record this together is because you get to bounce off each other.
Right.
And I think you can feed off that energy. There's a rapport. There's a banter. It really does crackle through the room. So trying to match that later, when I was doing that Frank, that was tough. You know, you're very in your head, and then a couple weeks of doing narration. When you sit down and you have dozens of hours of takes from across those 3 different environments and moods and time periods, trying to marry those into one cohesive whole is difficult enough.
Sure. Just
the process of chopping it up and getting every usable take for every usable line takes weeks.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
I can imagine.
And you get sick of it and you hate yourself and you hate the performance and you get so almost blind to the story because you've been immersed in it in so long that you start to question your judgment. That's why I called this kind of a purgatorial part of the process. It is the most far out on the shaky branch that you can get. You're very much just testing your own hypothetical. And all you have, it's like you're living in the chair at the eye doctor's office, just A/B testing these things forever.
Yeah.
But now that I know a bit more about the tech side, I think it becomes more than just chopping up takes and assembling them and trying to recapture comedic timing. And when characters interrupt each other, it still has to be comprehensible but believable. Like if you started interrupting me, I wouldn't immediately stop talking.
Sure.
There's a little bit of an overlap, and all those little like minutia. Well, is this too much of an overlap, or does he stop talking? Should I fade it out a little bit? It's all of those like gut decisions that you're just making like hundreds of a day.
Yeah.
It's tough, but one of the things I did on this project, which I think really prolonged this process, is called automation.
Oh, what is that?
So this is kind of the last step that you do. I used to work in GarageBand, and now I'm working in Logic Pro, which is a fancier, much more heavy duty version of GarageBand. And automation is where you're playing with the volume levels, basically. So you click a button and you see this graph, and it's this yellow straight line across every take and every individual track. And then you click on it and you make these little dots, and you pull the dots up and down. And that's how you juice or cut the volume.
Yes, I saw you do some of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did this. I mean, no joke, there are thousands of these across these 10 chapters. It is the most time-intensive part, but it enhances the performance. I think it gives some of that truth back to the performances, because the gear does its best to make things sound presentable, right? It doesn't. The mics are trained, the preamps are trained, all of these different things along the signal chain are trained to moderate the sound and capture something real. If your mic technique is shit, that'll throw it in a different direction.
Sure.
But automation means that if a moment is way too loud the way we were recording it, because Tristan and I hold the mic differently,
right?
So I would have to lift up his tracks a little bit and maybe cut mine. But if his character, say the two characters in the story are talking over the radio, and there's an emotional pause, Tristan is not silent during that pause. He's I mean, it sounds redundant, but he's an expressive performer.
Yeah, sure.
So there'll be a breath or something in that gap when the character is thinking or chewing on something or trying to find their words. And with a process like automation, just moving around hundreds of these little yellow dots, I think I would try to experiment with what happens if I raise the little yellow dot.
Oh, yeah, right.
So you're more aware of that breath. Because it is part of the performance. You could cut that out because, it's unprofessional. You shouldn't hear the breath. It should be all clean and normal. And that's why if you listen to, like, quote-unquote professional audiobooks, you usually don't hear any of the exhale, any of the inhale.
Right.
It almost sounds filtered, where you just hear the professional talking part and you get rid of any of the humanity, the breathing, the working, the living person on the other end of the microphone.
The performance, yeah.
And trying to find that happy medium of having a professional sounding recording while retaining some of that spark and imperfection. There are so many imperfections along the line. In the gulf between an idea you have and then the final audio drama product, there are a million mistakes. And I think it's trusting yourself and the audience to know which mistakes to keep.
Yeah, well, I imagine that's the difference between like an audio book and an audio drama. In an audio book, you're really just trying to get, there's an element of performance to it, of course, but you're trying to get the words that are on the page across to the audience in like as pure a form as you can. In an audio drama, it's much more like in film, when you're watching a film or a TV show, you obviously see and hear the characters breathing and, pausing in between lines and like having that real human part of their performance. So I think in an audio drama, you can and should have more freedom to include more of that. But I can imagine that it's agony trying to decide how to balance that and how much of it to include or beef up and how much of it to remove and tidy up. So that's, I don't envy that challenge. It sounds like that this requires, like this portion of the project requires quite a lot of creative work. Like I think if you look at it without really thinking about it, you might think, it's a very technical thing to just like add in sound effects and tweak things and move things around and move some dots. But it's a lot of creative work too. I've heard you describe this as like, this is where you write your final draft. Can you tell me more about what that means and what kind of creative decisions you had to make during this part? Yeah,
that's not my quote. I don't remember where I heard it, but it has haunted me ever since. The idea of you write your final draft in the editing room. To go back to something you just said before I answer the question about the visual part. If you're editing something like TV, you get to communicate a lot of the story in a non-auditory fashion, right?
Sure.
If you have a scene change, you can show a quick establishing shot of a location. You can do all of that in a visual shorthand that kind of streamlines the things you need to tell in the audio.
Yeah.
It becomes simpler. When you're doing an audio drama, you have to do all of that work in this one medium. So with a story, the story has a really active narrator who's commenting and joking and kind of making fun of characters at certain moments.
Making fun of himself too. It's fun.
Yeah, but fading between that and the real-time dialogue or action of the scene, knowing when you need to fade out, when you need to fade in, how to communicate transitions without any visual cues. A lot of that is just trial and error.
Yeah.
So it is creative in a way. It's different when you're writing or when you're drawing or when you're recording. There's kind of a contained sandbox. There are many different ways you can read a line, many different ways you can draw the cover of a book, like I did for this one. But with editing, you're being creative, but you have to kind of create the canvas too. It is as good as you are inventive. It's a problem-solving sort of creativity. It's not a blank canvas sort of creativity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're not creating something, but rather you're molding what's already there and having to work with what you have and maybe eliminating some things. I know you had to make some cuts to things that you weren't planning on. Can you talk more about that without giving too many specifics?
There's an element of editing when you're writing, but because I knew this was always going to be an audio drama, and I also wanted it to work as a novel, there's an element when you're writing it of saying the dialogue in your head or saying it out loud, especially since I knew I was writing for my voice and for Tristan's voice.
Yeah.
I feel like I could tune that pretty well. And then when I was editing that, at the time it was a script and then I novelized it later. But when you're editing that script, you're looking for different problems. You're trying to pace the story. You're working on tone. You're working on plot. Are there any callbacks or twists or resonances I can highlight in this moment? It's just going over that again and again and again until the framework of the story is as tight as possible. It's very different, I think, when you're editing an audio drama. So after, I have little pet names for, I guess, all these elements of the process. Once I've assembled a chapter, so that'll be hundreds of takes across as many, speaking parts as there are.
Sure.
There were up to like a dozen different tracks in each of these chapters. So,
wow, yeah.
For example, there would be the narration. And that's mixed totally. We'll talk about mixing and filters and stuff later, but these are all calibrated differently. There's not like a one answer for how any of these things need to sound. There could be narration, Frank, Duncan, an intercom, 1 to 2 radio tracks, a computer, the alien, which I'm calling the problem, and then there are sound effects that we'll get to later that require their own tracks and mixing, whether it's a shotgun or a heat ray. If you have any sort of cutaway or flashback for kind of an ancillary character, because this is sci-fi and we're playing with 2 timelines, there'll be moments where there's a cutaway to NASA or to what a TV would sound like in the 60s. So there are so many tracks working together here that obsessing over the logistics, which is the first job when you're editing that, of just making it all come together.
Sure.
Telling the story in any sort of comprehensible way. Once you do all of that tinkering, the job changes and you go back to what it felt like when you were writing. And that's where you have to kill your darlings. That's where, hey, I wrote this joke and I knew it was kind of weird and I don't like... You hear it now. You've chosen the best take. You could, I guess, reshoot, which we didn't really do any. Tristan didn't retake any of these lines.
Yeah.
I just worked with what we had because I could sort of tell. We did some rehearsing, but he has a smell test for, I've been writing stuff for him to say for 10 years.
Yeah.
So if a line didn't work, that's probably me. That's my fuck up, not his.
Sure.
And I think you can tell because he nails jokes in a certain way. There's a certain aplomb and spectacle. He's got this like piss and vinegar and fun to the way he delivers lines. So I can tell basically by, I have 3 takes for this line and none of them kind of work. 9 times out of 10, it's a writing problem.
Okay, yeah.
So it's getting over yourself and just cutting things.
Sure.
Cutting things that don't work, especially in a comedy. If a drama doesn't work, it's boring. If a comedy doesn't work, it's agony.
Sure.
You hate it. It is the most grating, annoying, try-hard, buzzing in your ear.
Right.
People have a visceral hatred of comedies that don't work.
Sure, it's a risky genre to write in.
It is by far the hardest genre to work in. And I've worked in enough mediums and genres that I can say that. It is the most demanding. Because it's not just that people have a very high standard. It's that idea of like, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
Because, you just made me laugh really hard in that scene. The next scene, it's like, come on, what's the next one?
Why are we not maintaining
I'm
this?
bored now. What are we doing?
Yeah.
It is, you constantly have to deliver.
Yeah.
So when you're editing, it's you have to be honest with yourself. Like, is this scene underwritten? Are my takes good enough? And it's a lot of patchwork and trying things and cutting things. And I didn't have to do as much on this project because I've been doing this for 10 years and I just know things. I'm better at this than I was 10 years ago. So I don't think I cut as much. I think I fought in the edit for things that I liked. There's an interlude where Tristan's character, Duncan, he is kind of disassociating. It's a moment of tension where he thinks he's about to die, and he's trying to come up with a plan really quickly.
Yeah.
And he like disassociates and starts talking to his hand, which
yes.
like the fingers are bunched up, and he starts talking to this character as Mr. Swan.
Yes.
Like he's just kind of, it's Gollum talking to Smeagol in the reflection of the lake.
I remember this moment. Yeah.
It's that, but it's really stupid. And I really loved that in the writing. I think it tells you something about Duncan as much as it is just a funny scene. But I knew it's weird, right? It's hard to explain that and execute that in a quick and funny way when you don't have the visual.
I was going to say, when you can't see it, it's hard to understand. Yeah.
Right. So the thing I found here is a tiny little tweak in the narration was always better than cutting a whole line.
I see.
Like it's all of these just learning and trying and closing your eyes and just clicking play and just being really honest and like sound checking and cutting and tweaking. So yeah, it is endless work in the weeds.
Yeah.
And then you try to, come up for air, and I would play for you a chapter every time I finished it. And you were incredibly helpful. I mean, you are a part of this process as much as you were a part of the recording process, voicing the computer.
Yeah.
Because you would have to be honest with me and say, like, I don't understand what's happening here.
Yeah, right. It's tough, especially because I could tell that you had worked really hard on something, and like sometimes just things don't come out the way that you're wanting them to, or you thought they would. But it's interesting that you sometimes have to get to the very end of the process in order to discover that, and then to edit it and, have the humility to change things or cut things or tweak things as needed.
And most of the time, I found this happening a lot in this project, where there would be a line of dialogue when it was spoken, like it works well on paper because you're just rolling through lines and actions and jokes. But I found when you heard it, there were moments that were redundant, and I would look at it and play it back and be like, oh, I kind of just have two versions of the same joke. So I'll just cut the one that's not as strong.
Yeah,
it's more those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah.
It's never the solution that's immediately apparent, but when you find it, the whole thing starts singing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I don't envy I'm sure you've heard this book probably 500 times, like if you put it all together. yeah, tiny little silences and negotiation. Yeah. I mean, it just changes your whole impression. Right. And well, so apart from just that, from getting the timing down, getting the line delivery, and just like all the pieces coming together, I think the other thing that makes this project so big is the number of, I don't want to say sound effects, because I don't think that's quite really the right way to describe what's happening, but there are a lot of noises in this project, in this book, in this audio drama, that are not just dialogue and narration. There's a lot of radio sounds and different like effects of people inside different places and intercoms and computer voices. So what do you think, looking back, what was maybe the most challenging sound to achieve? And then maybe what sound are you most proud of creating?
Ooh, okay. I'm proud of... So there are multiple spaceships in this. There are only two, so you don't have to worry about it. And one of them blows up. Spoiler alert. But I won't say which one. But the other one has a radio. And these two characters, Duncan and Frank, like I said, they cross over a lot, but there are also plenty of scenes where they're on their own. And a lot of these scenes, because they're guys and they're trying to talk about really heavy stuff, there are times where it's easier for them to have a difficult conversation over the radio. So a lot of the drama in this comedy happens over those radio filters. So I knew it was incredibly important that you be able to, like, it sounds scratchy and old and vintage and fun, that kind of old, we talked about Star Wars and Alien and the buttons and the lights and that kind of retro aesthetic. You want that sort of scratchy sound on the radio, but it also needs to be very clear.
Right, you need to be able to actually hear what they're saying, because you can't have subtitles on an audio drama.
Right, and there's real character work happening there. So that radio sound, because there are plenty of radios and intercoms and all sorts of filters on voices here, sounds over the TV, but having that one radio filter be correct, to have it have some static and feedback and grit, but also that you could hear those important breaths in those moments where someone was stuttering or struggling.
Maintain the performance element too, not just the sound effect. Yeah.
It was a full work week of tinkering with those sounds and feeding it through all of these different filters. I mean, that one is stacked. There are probably 10 or 12 levels to that sound, that filter on that one ship of this sort of intercom that they're talking to each other over. And that one, I mean, it's feeding it through like it's a bass guitar, and like it's in this strange dance hall, and all of these effects you're layering on top of it and getting it all crunchy and distorted and blown out, and then sometimes double tracking it.
Oh, okay.
So if I had Tristan talking over a radio and it's kind of soft spoken but very important that you know what it sounds like, I'll feed it through the finished radio filter.
Yes.
But then you'll make another track with his take clean, happening at the exact same time, and you make that one much lower in the mix.
Okay.
But adding a little bit of just a totally clean
Just
vocal
kind of
on
beefing
top of
it up. Yeah.
it clarifies it a little bit.
That's really interesting.
But just a little bit.
This is so great because I think a lot of people, including myself, like I don't know a ton about audio. So in my head, I think, oh, technology is so amazing now. You can just click, radio filter and then boom, you're done. And I guess you could do that, but it's not going to sound exactly how you want it, and you're not going to get a lot of the intricacies of the clarity of lines and stuff. So that's quite a lot of work. I do remember you agonizing over that radio sound, and I heard a lot of different versions, but the one you ended on, I think, is really perfect for what you were trying to achieve.
And there's something selfish of you don't want to use, like, if whatever program you're working in will have a couple filters that are labeled radio.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
But I don't want to use those. I want to make my own. I want it to be special and bespoke.
I was going to say, the reason that I said earlier I don't like the word sound effect is because you created everything yourself.
Yep.
Like, there are a lot of other noises that happen. Like, you did a lot of Foley work. You didn't just look up, like, you didn't just put in a royalty-free explosion sound. Like, you made all of these sounds yourself, either with your mouth or with technological manipulation, right? And so that's why I didn't like to use the word sound effect.
One of my very favorite things in any field of comedy is the flashback scenes in Arrested Development, where they use exactly the same actors and put silly wigs on them.
Yes, it's so funny.
I think that's sort of lo-fi. I mean, low effort in a sense, but it's also just a great creative decision.
Yeah, it's intentional. Yeah, it's not lazy.
Right.
Yeah.
That kind of lo-fi effects work, I think, is funny, and the goal is funny. The goal is not to blow you away with how fascinating and high budget
how
this
realistic it sounds.
It's to make you laugh.
Right.
So the sound effects are an opportunity to do that, and a challenge. Like, I had to make the sound of this kind of crackling, cranking heat ray that would like blast out these bursts of heat and death.
Yes.
Or a shotgun noise, or the alien, the problem, is trying to melt through a door, and there's like a hissing sound as he's kind of burning through it.
Yes.
There are all of these effects, or a character's trapped in a kitchen appliance at one point, and he talks while he's in there.
Yeah.
So you have to hear a certain amount of echo. Like, what does a character sound like inside an oven?
Yeah, a tight enclosed metal space. Yeah.
So you need some amount of ambiance and reflection of that sound kind of bouncing around. It needs a level of echo, but does it sound metallic enough?
Yeah.
It's all of these like stupid hypotheticals, but if you do them right, they're immersive and funny. And if you do them wrong, they're distracting. Again, comedy is incredibly unforgiving here. So it was a lot of just trying things and being humble and being silly and making stupid sounds. The thing I'm most proud of is the problem noises.
I was going to say, we got to talk about that. The aliens are called problems in this story. They're green blobs. I won't say much more about them because I don't want to spoil anything. But Cam did all of the, I guess, voice the right word? You did the voices for these things? You did the vocals for the problems? Talk about that.
Yeah, and so that was despicable. There's a level of, and I wrote out all of these kind of onomatopoeia sort of words in the stage direction.
Yeah.
So every single problem noise is scripted.
Yeah.
And he becomes more of a character. One of these problems in particular becomes more of a character, but he never speaks. But there's still characterization being done there.
Sure, it's not just random noises. Like
right.
It's again, it's intentional. Yeah,
and there's an arc there.
It's telling a story.
So it's trying to, close your eyes and wag your head back and forth and make these like growling, snarling, or he's doing this. He does like a gross like sort of sniff at one point. Like he does, or these little kind of burbling noises if he's thinking or running or like there are all of these noises in there, and it's a lot of it is just walking around the apartment, just making noises until it's like, okay, this is something. Let's chase this down.
I wish
more.
I had like security camera footage of you doing this, because you did a lot of this when I was like at work and you're working at home. I wish I could have seen some of it in action.
And again, every situation calls for a very specific sound.
Yeah.
And you want it to be recognizable but not redundant, because it is still supposed to be funny. Like, he's so gross and overpowered and dangerous with these nasty little teeth that you don't want to get sick of him. You want that novelty. You don't show the shark too much in Jaws. You don't show the xenomorph too much. I don't want to show the problem too much.
Right. And if it's so gross, it's so like I don't know, unnerving. It might start to feel grating and annoying and like, I hate that sound. Yeah.
But the reason that it's my favorite is not just that it was fun to do and it's an incredible challenge. It's that there is no processing.
I was going to ask, did you do any processing on those sounds? Nope. That's so cool. So that's purely from your vocal cords.
Yes, all of it.
That's amazing.
There's nothing. There's not even little tweaks for sound. It's just straight for all of the problem noises.
That's really cool.
So that's the thing I'm fairly proud of. And
I can see that.
When we announced this book, we did an animated trailer, which I animated.
Yeah.
And there are problem noises throughout that because you want to introduce the alien, you want to introduce the characters. And I had to do some new problem sounds for that.
Oh, you didn't just pull from the book. You had to add some more.
I pulled a few of them, but like I said, you need a particular sound. It needs to be making a particular noise in each circumstance. So I had to jump back into those disgusting sounds.
That's incredible. Were there any like funny, like weird Foley tricks you did? Like, what's like the weirdest thing you had to do? Like, not with your voice, but to create other ambient noises in the story?
It might have been inside the oven. I think the filter is technically called Villa Bathroom.
Nice.
I had to go through hundreds of like spaces or recording booths or concert halls to find the right level of ambiance and then kind of modify it a little bit. And I think that ended up being a Villa Bathroom.
Nice.
It's hard doing this with a handheld mic because you have to, especially if you're in character and trying to perform and really, act and do the thing properly.
Yeah, right.
Because you also have to, at all moments, be aware of how you're breathing.
Sure.
How you're holding the mic.
Yeah.
I think it's helped, honestly, doing the podcast a million times.
Do it all the time, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm used to holding this mic in this position. And different voices have a different amount of breath and phlegm and spit and all this disgusting shit.
Yeah.
And those were all kind of unique issues.
Yeah.
But overcoming those and getting into that character, when you can control all those variables on the technical side and then just perform, those are the really gratifying moments.
Yeah. Can you talk more about one of the things we talked about in our first interview was how you didn't do any research in terms of like understanding the science part of this science fiction. You were intentionally being kind of silly and technically and technologically inaccurate and stuff, and like that was really fun. Did you stick to that philosophy when doing the sound effects, or did you have to do any research of like, okay, but what does a radio actually sound like? Or what would a spaceship blowing up actually sound like? Did you do any of that, or was it all just purely from just whatever base experience and knowledge you had going in?
It's not about base experience. It's about what's in your head when you write it. And that's why I like wearing all these hats. That's why I do these things myself. If I have an idea and I want it to be a novel, well, I better figure out how to write a fucking novel. If it's a short story, same thing, totally different rules. Audio drama, audio book, I've done both. They're very different experiences. If I start having visual ideas, I learned how to draw comics and graphic novels, and I like that. If I want to edit, okay, I want it to sound a certain way, and I want to achieve that vision. It's just pushing yourself. It's just learning all these different talents. I don't remember what the question was.
Was asking if you did any research on any of the... So
none of these things are research. They're just, I have a vision. What stands between me and realizing that vision so I can hand it to you? Well, I need to hand you part of my brain.
Yeah. Well, again, I like that because, again, you're not trying to make it sound as accurate as possible, quote unquote. You're trying to make it your own vision and your ideas come to life. It's like subjective, but like personal and creative, and not just like, what does a real spaceship sound like?
Yeah, no, I don't care about that. There's a boom effect when something monumental blows up. And I made the boom noise, and then I put a certain amount of stink on it just to make it sound resonant. You want it to sound big and boom, that's in my head. I know when that sounds right. I know what I want a 60s TV filter to sound like. So it's just tinkering in, like, getting incrementally closer to that sound. There's a moment where we jump into a character's mind. They're on this like vision quest, and they're chasing something through. They're chasing a thought basically through their own mind, and there's an amount of echo there in their largely empty head, and it's all just what's funny and what was in my head when I did it.
Yeah.
And whatever skills I need to learn on that path, I will bulldoze my way to.
I like that. I feel like that requires both a great amount of humility, but also trust in yourself, and not second guessing and having, well, actually, I don't think I actually know what a 1960s TV would sound like. Maybe I should look that up. Like, it's just trusting your own instincts and what you want it to sound like. I think that's really cool.
It's stubbornness more than it is expertise.
Well,
because you can fuck up any line,
yeah,
any reading, any sound effect, but if you trust that like initial vision, that's something. Chase that.
Yeah, no, I like that. Well, speaking of stubbornness, my final question is just about, like, I had the privilege of seeing you work on this, right? Because I am married to you and I live with you. And I know that this part of the project was, I think it's safe to say, it was your least favorite part, just in that it was the most challenging. I mean, the way you've been describing it, it sounds like it's incredibly rewarding, but it's also really challenging. It's a lot of like banging your head against a wall and trying, and then some of it's just tedious, right? Having to do some of the more technical things and the less creative things. Did this wear you out? Do you feel like I don't want to do any audio for a long time, or did it really feed your creative impulse and make you excited for the next audio project that you do?
I like all the parts except the one I'm doing. I think
at any given time.
I think that happens on every project, and the more you're in post-production, the more you romanticize. Oh, to just write again.
Right, but then as soon as you sit down and you write, you're like, God damn it, this is so hard. I wish I could just be editing the audio because I know what to do.
Yeah, and this one was a bit of a homecoming for me. I spent 2 years doing comics and graphic novels, writing and illustrating, and that is a very. I mean, if you look at a novel versus a comic, the amount of time and effort it takes to write a page versus draw a page of a comic, there's no comparison.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And a lot of the times in a comic, I mean, you don't think about it when you're reading it, but someone has to draw that main character like 6 or 7 different times on the same page.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. That's a lot of fucking work versus just typing their name out.
And it's a lot of time spent with that character. Yeah.
So when I moved back into writing, when I started this project, I don't know, number of months ago, it felt like taking the weight off the bat in baseball, like when you step up to the plate, because I could just blow through scenes and I could stitch together all of these chapters instead of it being, okay, I'm going to tear my hair out and I'll have 1 page done at the end of the day.
Right.
I could, if it was a great day, I could get 1,000 words, 2,000, 3,000, how it, it doesn't matter.
That's got to feel liberating. Yeah.
It does, but it starts to torment you later. There's an agony to writing. Of course. Then you get to recording and it's like, shit, I have to now make all of this work.
Yeah, it's no longer abstract. I have to like actually make it work.
Yeah, I have to be as good an actor as I hope this scene was written.
And then again, you have to be as good an editor as you are an actor and a writer, right. Which editing is just writing and acting anyway, as we already talked about. So
every part of the process is tough and challenging and takes longer than you think, but you tend to kind of forgive the sins of the previous one when you're stuck in the next one.
Yeah, that's a really good answer.
This one did take much longer because I did things like automation or I didn't before, which makes this final product sound better.
Yeah, I mean, sounds great. Yeah.
If I did my job well here, you're not going to have to constantly click like the up and down buttons on your phone to change the volume.
Yeah, that's always the worst.
It should all be mixed. I mean, we talk about this when we watch movies at home, and I'm sure you listening have the same experience. You can tell when a movie was mixed for an IMAX theater,
right?
Where it doesn't matter how fucking loud it is,
right? And not a home screen, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If the audio was mixed for a home, where it is balanced, where you can hear the action, but it doesn't blow out the TV, and then you can hear people talking in the next scene.
Yeah, right.
That's the job of automation, and it takes forever.
I imagine.
It's mind-numbing and unforgiving.
Yeah.
But it makes it plug and play. It makes it accessible, and it just sounds better.
Yeah, totally. I am so struck by the naming of automation. It implies that it's an automatic process, and it's so clearly not. But no, the amount of work that you've put into this project in every element of it, I mean, you always put everything into your projects. You always work so hard on them in every element. But this project was, I think, much bigger than you ever could have anticipated. And I know how much work you put into every single element of this. And it has paid off. It sounds fantastic. Listener, I cannot wait for y'all to hear it. It is so incredible. Thank you so much, Cam, for joining me for this interview. This has been
Thank you for doing
delightful.
This. I mean, besides you, these projects are the most important thing in my life. And I'm proud of this one. It's weird. I think I hate things while I'm doing them.
Yeah.
But now
just
that
the
I'm,
joy of being an artist.
yeah, and then you have to do all the promotional shit, and that sucks too. But I'm proud of this when I look back on it, and I think you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
If you've listened to this show, if you enjoy comedy, if you like sci-fi, if you just like rapport and giggle and adventure, I want this to be like a big, rollicking, fun time with great character moments, and I've had different goals for different projects. This one, I wanted to be really entertaining and fun.
I think it really is, and I think the listeners are going to think so too.
Hope so.
If you have any questions for Cam about his editing process, you can, the post-production process, you can, if you're on YouTube, you can comment down below and ask down there. If you're listening on Patreon, you can comment on the Patreon post. Otherwise, if you're listening just as a podcast, you can send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. I love hearing Cam talk about his projects. He's got all kinds of things to say. So if you have more questions, please share them. And of course, buy the book. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much, Cam. And if you didn't catch parts 1 and 2 of our interview series, they were also a lot of fun. Go check those out. We did them last week and the week before.
And there's that animated book trailer.
Yeah, check out the trailer. It's
Speaking
so fun.
of things that took a lot of fucking time.
Yeah, right? Yeah, just to experience more of it. That trailer is a good time too. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you all in the next episode.